the candidates for the 3rd Congressional District.
There's deep change needed in a lot of different ways.
There is a clear message of unity that we want to project.
Debating the issues that matter to Michigan, the issues that matter to you. From your local election headquarters, this is the 3rd Congressional District Debate, live from the WOOD TV8 studios.
Good evening and welcome to the 3rd Congressional District Debate. Tonight, you will get your best opportunity to hear from the two candidates that want to fill a relatively rare open seat in the U.S. House. The 3rd District is comprised of most of Kent County, Ionia, Berry, and Calhoun counties, and a small area in Montcalm County. The seat is open. In other words, no incumbent is running due to the current Congressman, Justin Amash, deciding not to run for re-election. That sets up the contest that we're featuring tonight. The candidates have agreed to come together here tonight for 1 hour and answer a series of questions. The questions were either submitted directly by viewers or drawn from viewer suggestions. I will introduce the candidates only by name and party affiliation. In the next hour, they will make a full introduction of themselves. First, we welcome Democratic candidate for the 3rd Congressional District, Hillary Scholten. And we welcome Republican Party candidate for the 3rd Congressional District, Peter Meijer. A note about tonight's in-person debate. Nexstar Incorporated, the parent company of WOOD TV, and all of us practice social distancing and other protocols prescribed by the CDC, including wearing masks in common areas. Both campaigns have agreed to preset debate rules and have 3 opportunities for rebuttals. A random draw determined who goes first, and Mr. Meijer's name was drawn to take the first question. And so we begin. After Tuesday night's first presidential debate, there has been much talk about the lack of decorum and civility. Thinking about that debate, do you believe the American voter was well served when it came to making an informed decision when choosing a candidate for whom to vote? And were you satisfied or dissatisfied with your party's nominee and his performance? Mr. Meijer, you're up first.
Well, thank you, Rick, so much for having us here tonight. And thank you to all the viewers joining at home. And thank you to my Democratic opponent, Ms. Scholten, for being here as well. I think we all left Tuesday's debate wanting a little bit more, wanting more substance, wanting more content, wanting to hear a clearer articulation on both sides of where the plans were going to be. I hope that my opponent and I tonight give you a much easier job, Rick, than Chris Wallace had there. But I think we need to certainly move past this divisive moment. You know, I think of the legends who have held this seat before, like Gerald Ford, Paul Henry, and Vern Ehlers, and their commitment not only to working across the aisle, but also to civility and unity. I think those are West Michigan values that I hope to embody, and that is where I think we need to go as a country. So I certainly hope that in the next debate, we see a little bit more of that and a little bit less of the discord that we saw on Tuesday.
Ms. Scholten, you, like so many, I'm sure, watched at least part of that debate. Do you think the American voter was well served, and were you satisfied or dissatisfied with your party's nominee?
Well, Rick, I also just want to say thank you so much for having us here tonight. Thank you so much to the viewers at home for tuning in. This election is so consequential. Thank you to Mr. Meijer for taking the time to be here. I also hope that we will give you a much more lucid and coherent explanation of the arguments of our positions. I don't believe that the viewers were satisfied. We're also bringing a unifying message to West Michigan. You know, I'm glad to hear Mr. Meijer say that he's interested in unity, because so far the attacks on me have been divisive and haven't passed a fact check. So I'm glad to have the opportunity here tonight to be able to discuss these issues a little bit more, so the constituents can hear for themselves the truth.
Ms. Scholten, the next question goes to you first. Many viewers ask this in varying ways about cooperation after this election. So I'm going to give you both the same question with a little different scenario. If you're elected to Congress and Donald Trump is reelected as president, will you work with him to get things done in Washington? And if Vice President Biden is elected, will you challenge him where you disagree?
Absolutely. Everyone who knows my story knows that I was not born and raised a Democrat. I am used to working with a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of different people to get things done. It's what I've been doing my entire career. When I was an attorney at the Department of Justice, I worked with Republicans and Democrats alike on some of the most divisive issues. We heard from arguments on the left and the right about how to make common sense, practical immigration policy. I can't think of a more divisive issue right now. And we did it. We came up with laws and regulation that served the interest of justice and compassion. And that's absolutely what I'll do in Congress, because the people of Michigan's 3rd Congressional District are tired of the gridlock, and they need a solution-oriented mom in Congress to get it done.
Mr. Meijer, same question with a little different scenario. If you're elected to Congress and Vice President Biden is elected president, will you work with him? And if President Trump is reelected, will you challenge him where you disagree?
Absolutely, Rick. My background in veteran advocacy has been bipartisan through and through. I helped pass the post 9/11 GI Bill across some of the early objections of my party so that we could ensure that returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan had the opportunity to seek educational advancement. I also helped elect more post 9/11 veterans to Congress to try to reduce the partisanship that is locking up our country and make sure that we could drive forward with folks who are putting country ahead of party. Now, if elected, there are plenty of places where the president and I agree. I agree we need to fix our broken immigration system. I agree we need to work to improve our criminal justice system and implement new criminal justice reforms. I agree that we need to end our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I also wish, and I will hold my party and our leaders to account for this, I wish we were doing more on the climate crisis. I wish we were doing more to bring down our deficit and ultimately start to pay down our debt so that's not the legacy we leave our children.
Thank you both. I want to move on to a pressing issue that demands the attention of every elected official in this country. By the way, probably demands the attention of everybody in this country. It's social injustice, racism, a criminal justice system that works for some, but not for all.
No.
We've seen frustration from this after years of injustice, and we've seen it spill onto our streets right here in Grand Rapids. Mary Reed from Grand Rapids asked, the racial inequality issue has been around for decades. If elected, what type of legislation would you propose to Congress to affect social justice? And I would add, as a moderator, not just legislation, but how would you as an elected leader try to change and shape public opinion? Starting with you, Mr. Meijer.
Oh, thank you, Mary, for that question. We, as a nation, we mourned the killing of George Floyd and the death of Grand Rapids' own Breonna Taylor. And we saw the divisions that are still there. We saw the injustices that still exist in our system. Now, this is a multi-layered problem that we need to be focusing on exposing one piece at a time. I mentioned criminal justice earlier and continuing and building upon the First Step Act so that we break the cycles of generational poverty that are caused by mass incarceration. But we also need to ensure that we're providing economic and educational opportunities for all. Again, we're starting down that path. The Opportunity Zone legislation has already encouraged additional investment in areas that have been historically underinvested in, that were redlined through racist policies of the past, and we're working to correct that. But above all, we need to make sure that we are building trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve, because ultimately that's what's going to bring us towards a better future with safety and prosperity.
Ms. Scholten, this is an issue that we have all watched develop, and I know that both of you have discussed this with me in different interviews. So what if you're elected, can you do, yes, legislation, as Mary asked, may be part of it,
Yeah.
but there's also the idea of trying to get people to think in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. I have spent my life advocating for people on the margins, and Mary, thank you for this question. It is such a pressing one. I worked as a social worker here with women and children at the Mel Trotter Ministries, seeing families working hard, playing by the rules, still not able to get ahead. We see how that generational poverty just won't let go of people here. And so we do need legislative policy to correct this, I believe. We need health care. We need to protect people with pre-existing conditions. We need to have a living wage. We need to bring good paying jobs back here to West Michigan. But I also believe that the message from the top deeply matters. And we need leaders who are going to put these issues front and center, not sow division and fear in our community as my opponent is trying to do.
We have seen dozens and dozens of protests around the country. And let me just pause here for a second to say that as someone who has made their living because of the First Amendment, we know that many of those have been very peaceful. They've been talking about racial and social injustice, but some have turned violent. What do you consider, Ms. Scholten, you'll get the question first, what do you consider peaceful protests? How would you deal with protests that fall outside of that definition? And I want to include in this the idea, the premise of defunding police. First
yeah, absolutely. Well, let me be very clear. We do not support defunding the police in this campaign. I have been very clear about that. I do not support defunding the police. I have worked with far too many victims of domestic violence. I'm a mom who lives on the southeast side of Grand Rapids, where we have seen increased gun violence this summer. And it's too personal to me to ever support an agenda like that. So happy to have the opportunity to address this directly, again, because of some of the lies that Mr. Meijer has been telling about us. We denounced the violence here in Grand Rapids the morning after it happened, I believe even before Mr. Meijer issued a statement. And I was down with my church group cleaning up after the violence. But I was also so proud to march alongside folks who were hungry for racial justice in this country, because we need to get to a place of true justice in order to know peace. But we absolutely cannot get there through violence, and we must come together as a community.
Mr. Meijer, there are peaceful protests, there are protests that have been otherwise, and talk about defunding police.
Yes, well, we saw the devastation that was caused in our downtown during the riots in late May, when we had over $500,000 in property damage and destruction. Now, peaceful protest, having your voice heard, making sure that you're standing up for what you believe is right, is not only necessary and a First Amendment protection, but I think it's oftentimes our obligation as Americans. But make no mistake, we must swiftly condemn the arson, the looting, the violence that has claimed so many lives, the hijacking of a movement that seeks peace into one that is trying to upend our country as we know it today. Now, I'm proud to be endorsed by the Grand Rapids Police Officer Association and by law enforcement officials throughout the district, because they know that there is a strong distinction between free speech and violence, between standing up for what you believe in and wanting to tear other things down.
We're going to do something a little different. We've done this in some of our other debates, but for you at home, I want you to know that we have reached out and viewers have reached back with great responses and some really great questions. I'm reading some of them. Others have been recorded by those very viewers and candidates. This is the first one of those, and it kind of bridges the conversation we're having now to where we're going to go. This is a question from viewer Daniel Van Muurs from Grand Rapids.
COVID-19 has made connection between health and climate justice, such as clean air and clean water. COVID does not affect everyone equally, and neither does climate change. What policies will you support and advance to address the unfair burden of pollution on low-income communities and people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color?
That goes first to you, Mr. Meijer, and this is going to take us into our next segment where we're going to be talking about the pandemic, and I thought that was an excellent question to get us there.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for that question, and I completely agree. The burden of environmental pollution, the burden of our climate crisis has disproportionately fallen on the most vulnerable in our communities. While we're making great strides in reducing the particulate air pollution that is causing disproportionately negative outcomes to those who live in urban areas or who live near industrial sites, we must and can do more. I am strongly supportive of bringing back a stewardship ethos, a conservation ethos, making sure that we are taking care of the most vulnerable in our community. And specifically when it comes to addressing some of these issues, you mentioned it, COVID has also disproportionately hit the most vulnerable among us. If we look at the kids who are falling behind in school, it is the Black and Hispanic students who are suffering the most by having their schools shut down, who are falling behind their peers. And I don't want to see us have a lost generation of students who are always going to be desperately trying to keep up. We must make sure that we have policies that are helping everyone in our community, and clean air and clean water should never be a luxury.
Ms. Scholten, we have seen that disproportionate impact in low-income communities, in communities of color. How do we address that?
You know, I've seen this firsthand as well. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I spent my early years as a social worker working at a homeless shelter here, seeing how unhealthy environments disproportionately impact communities of color. I live on the southeast side near the 49507 district, where we're experiencing a major lead contamination problem. We have to elevate these issues, and we need to elect leaders who will put them first. I'm so proud to be endorsed by the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters, nonpartisan organizations who choose candidates that they feel will be the best stewards of our environment. I think it's important to remember that, you know, Mr. Meijer owns stock in a major coal mining corporation that has put PFAS chemicals into our waterways and has personally profited from that. It's important that we elect leaders who will put our communities first before profit.
Mr. Meijer, I believe you have a rebuttal. You have 30 seconds to answer Ms. Scholten.
Well, thank you, Rick. I had hoped that we could rise above some of the petty partisanship that we saw on Tuesday's debates. But my opponent consistently accuses me of putting profits ahead of people. I did not profit when I went to Iraq to serve my country. I did not profit when I went to Afghanistan as a conflict analyst. I didn't profit in the humanitarian aid sector either, and I'm not running for Congress to profit. I'm running to make sure we have a government that works, and I hope we can have a better tone and civility for the rest of this debate.
And for a rebuttal of 30 seconds, Ms. Scholten.
Knowing where the interests of our elected officials lie isn't a partisan issue, and we honor your service as a veteran, certainly, but we have to know where the obligations of our elected officials lie. I've made a promise to divest from individual stock so that people know that I'm putting the needs of our constituents first. Mr. Meijer has refused to divest or disclose where his personal interests and profits lie.
And Mr. Meijer has another rebuttal of 30 seconds.
6 months ago, I stated that the ethics rules we have for members of Congress are insufficient, and that all members of Congress should pledge to put their holdings in a blind trust. Now, we have disclosed everything. There's 26 pages of my financial disclosures up on the air. The only stock that I personally hold today is 5 shares in John Deere that my grandfather Jim gave me when I was born. Now, I'll sell that if my opponent strongly suggests, but at the end of the day, we're here for the people, not to profit.
So as Daniel helped us move from talking about one very serious issue in this country as it pertains to social injustice, racism, and all that we've talked about throughout this spring and summer, we have also been dealing with a pandemic that goes all the way back to March. I don't know what more can be said about it. We've all experienced it in different ways. But I want to start that conversation by this. The president's response to the pandemic is a subject of much debate, as is the response of governors around the country, including here in Michigan. So, and I want to make sure that we're back on track with all the rebuttals. I believe I'm going first to you,
yes.
Ms. Scholten. Where do you think the governmental response for COVID-19 has gone right, and where do you think it has gone wrong?
Well, you know, I really applaud the bipartisan effort that came together to pass immediate COVID relief and get it into the hands of hardworking Americans who had been without employment and laid off, you know, supporting our small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program. That show of bipartisanship was some of the best that our government has to offer. But we're significantly off track. Unemployment remains too high. Individuals are now, you know, it's the first of the month. Individuals are scrambling to pay their rent and buy food for their family, and they're still unemployed. And unemployment insurance has run out. And a lack of coming together to solve problems for the American people has really left too many hardworking families high and dry. It's not enough. We need another stimulus, and fast.
Mr. Meijer, and we are going to talk about a stimulus in a minute. Talk to me about where you think government got it right and where did they get it wrong?
You know, I think we've been grappling with this evolving crisis, and we have, as my opponent referenced, passed some strong stimulus legislation. I think the Paycheck Protection Program was necessary so that our small businesses and entrepreneurs had the opportunity to weather this storm. But there were certainly missteps. You know, I think we see in our current federal government a hesitation and an inability to adapt rapidly when an emergency presents itself. We saw a lack of clarity with the CDC guidelines very early on. I think we need to make sure that we are building a robust and responsive government, one that is agile and can respond to an evolving and dangerous world as quickly as we should expect it to. I'm very encouraged by Operation Warp Speed, which I think is moving at tremendous strength and speed towards a vaccine and a cure, because that's how we're going to finally put these dark days of the coronavirus pandemic behind us.
During the course of the pandemic, we have heard many official proclamations about what we should and shouldn't do. That has evolved because we've learned more and more about this disease. Wearing a mask is one of those things that has become particularly political for some. Jeff Miller from Belding asks, is there any scientific evidence that wearing a mask is working? I'm not going to ask you both to become scientists today, but you can weigh in on that. But I will expand that to also ask if you believe, as Vice President Biden has suggested, there should be a national mask mandate. And I start with you, Mr. Meijer.
Oh, we wore them in the studio today. 2 months ago when I was up on this stage, I was criticized, and I've been criticized by some for wearing masks in the mailers that we're sending out. I believe that masks are a reasonable solution. They're a reasonable precaution to make sure that we are not spreading that aerosolized version of the virus. And again, I was referencing earlier on some unclear guidance from the CDC, but I think we're in a good position now where we understand some of those risks. Now, as to a national mask mandate, I think one of the strengths of our country is federalism. One of the strengths of the response has been trying to make sure that on a state-by-state basis, we have what's going to work best for citizens in that state. And so I don't support national mask mandates. I do support letting the governors of those states who are going to know what their citizens need the best, letting them decide. And ideally, having that decision be made closer to the people being impacted by it. So again, it can be as responsive and effective as possible as we get through these tough times.
Ms. Scholten, please.
We're all in this together. I think that if you look closely at the science, we see that wearing a mask has cut down the spread of COVID-19. This virus, which has spread through the air, doesn't know state or regional boundaries. It is so important that we stop the spread of this virus so that we can get our economy back on track. And stop this terrible pandemic, which is claiming far too many lives. We need to take decisive action. You know, as you mentioned earlier, this pandemic is disproportionately impacting poor communities, communities of color, and we need to act swiftly, responsibly, so that we can take care of the needs of others, not just look out for our own interest. And we know that the science clearly states that wearing a mask will slow, if not completely stop the spread.
Finding a vaccine for COVID-19 will be an integral part of getting back to normal for all of us. So too will making sure that businesses and individuals who are hard hit economically by the pandemic have a chance to rebuild. And first to you, Ms. Scholten, you already referenced this a moment ago, but if you are elected, would you support another stimulus? And the second part of this is important because in Washington, there is a big gap between the dollars and cents that Republicans and Democrats seem willing to go towards for a stimulus. So to the degree that you can, you don't have to put an exact dollar figure on it, but give me an idea where you would land if indeed you believe another stimulus is needed.
You know, we absolutely do need another stimulus, but we can't just be handing out a blank check and running up our federal deficit. If you want frugal, targeted spending, send a Dutch mom from West Michigan to Congress to get it done. We need to target the things that are an immediate priority. Putting putting a stimulus check back in the hands of hardworking Americans. I do believe we need another round of direct payment to individuals. We need to reinstate unemployment insurance until we have the pandemic under control. We need especially to make sure that we are targeting access to affordable health care. You know, that's not going to be caught up in a COVID stimulus bill, but it has to be part of this conversation because it's part of the economic calculus. So, you know, when we're talking about a stimulus bill, we can't put a dollar amount on people's health. We got to get the virus under control first, and then we can talk about how much money we need to spend to stimulate the economy.
Mr. Meijer, would you support another stimulus, and can you put a dollar figure on it?
I absolutely would. And I think it's unwise to put what that direct dollar figure would be right now before understanding where are the key areas we need to be supporting. Now, obviously that includes, and I'm supportive of, the direct cash payments to Americans to give that cushion to help folks get through this hard times. But frankly, I've been very disappointed by how Nancy Pelosi has been holding up a lot of the more recent stimulus packages so she could push through wish list items like tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires on the coast. That's not what we need. We don't need the degree of obstruction that we're seeing there. What we need is true bipartisanship and working together. And I'm very concerned that Nancy Pelosi's already pledged $700,000 of liberal dark money to help elect my opponent in this race. I think that's getting us away from the solutions we need to be focusing on. I wish they were devoting those funds not to extreme partisanship, but to finding solutions, because the only way we're going to tackle this COVID pandemic and move past it is going to be if we reach out with open arms and make sure that we are doing what's in the best interest of the American people, not our party.
Just as we get ready to move to our next subject, I did not tell you this before this debate began, but I normally tell all of the candidates we will start, and before you know it, it will be over. We're halfway through already, and we're just scratching the surface. Thank you both for adhering to the time. I appreciate it. Let's move on to this. With the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the question of confirming another justice before the election has created real controversy. So, Mr. Meijer, begin with you on this question. Do you support the president's efforts to expedite that process, or do you believe that it should wait until after the election and leave the choice to whomever wins the White House?
Well, first, let me say we all mourn the passing of Justice Ginsburg. She was a trailblazer, an icon, and the nation owes her a debt of gratitude for her service. Now, the president, under his constitutional authority, has nominated Amy Coney Barrett, an eminently qualified jurist, to fill the vacancy that's been created. And the Senate, in its constitutional advice and consent authority, has chosen to announce the start of nomination hearings. Now, again, we're running for Congress, which doesn't have a role in those hearings, but I am strongly inclined to support, pending the outcome of the hearings, Amy Coney Barrett becoming the next justice on the Supreme Court. But I'm also very troubled that we've seen, and we saw this in Tuesday's debates, Vice President Joe Biden and the Democratic Party either flirting with or outright saying that they will pack the court, that they will undermine decades and nearly a century of precedents and undermine our confidence in the judiciary. And I hope my opponent will say here and now that she does not support packing the Supreme Court.
Ms. Scholten, the question of should another justice be acted upon before the election?
You know, Rick, I'm running for U.S. Congress to represent the people of Michigan's 3rd Congressional District. What the Senate does doesn't have a huge bearing on my race, but we do know that this confirmation process brings immediately to light a crucial issue for 2020, the top issue on the minds of voters, and that is access to affordable health care. The Affordable Care Act is before the Supreme Court right now. Republicans, like my opponent, are fighting with everything they have to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Mr. Meijer has signed a pledge to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It is the law that protects people with pre-existing conditions. 1 million people in Michigan would lose their health care coverage without this law. It is so crucial that we fight with everything we have to expand access. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. So the extent to which these Supreme Court discussions bring to light the issue of health care, I'm happy to discuss that, because the people who I talk to in my neighborhood, having access to affordable health care is top of mind for them.
Here's another issue that may come in front of the Supreme Court. Given that this election, like the election in 2000, is not going to be known on election night. Your election may be, but the presidential election is not going to be known on election night, unless something miraculous happens, I think. And like the 2000 election, it may end up, or at least parts of it may end up in the Supreme Court. Given all of that, does that have any impact on what you think should be done with either filling or not filling that nomination prior to the election? Start with you, Ms. Scholten.
You know, again, I think that the American people need to be able to speak to the type of representation that they want to have through the electoral process. And I believe that, you know, the more I talk to people in this district, the more I hear just how pressing the issue of affordable health care is. That is a central issue before the Supreme Court, and it is with this election. This administration is fighting to take away health care from millions of Americans. So I believe that the people need an opportunity to speak on this issue without this administration moving forward.
Mr. Meijer.
Justice Ginsburg herself in 2016 supported filling the vacancy caused by the death of Justice Scalia, so that we would have 9 justices going into the 2016 presidential election. So I've actually answered that question. But what I also want to tackle is the lie that my opponent just told, that I don't support protecting pre-existing conditions. I was up on this stage 2 months ago saying I would not support a repeal of the Affordable Care Act without making sure there was a workable replacement that protected pre-existing conditions and expanded access. Now, the Affordable Care Act has failed in that first word, to be affordable, because it has just incentivized companies to profit off of taxpayer dollars rather than encouraging them to compete off of value and quality. This is where we need to get to with our health system. I want to see increased competition. I want to see market-based reforms, and I want to see customer-centric, consumer-centric, patient-centric healthcare, because no more families in the U.S. should be bankrupted by the cost of their healthcare.
Ms. Scholten, you're going to use your second. You both have one left, one rebuttal left after this. Please go ahead.
I am. You know, Mr. Meijer, talk is cheap, but actions matter. And you signed a pledge vowing to vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It is the law that protects people with pre-existing conditions. Without it, there's no protection for people with pre-existing conditions. So you may say one thing on the debate stage, but when you think no one's looking, you sign a pledge to repeal this. And, you know, we want to know how much this is going to cost. I agree, we need competition. That's why I support creating a public option to incentivize and make more competition and give folks more options when it comes to affordable health care.
I want you to get ready to listen to another viewer who sent a question, and you will hear it because we are talking about the Supreme Court. But he's been thinking about this, and Steve Timmerman from Grand Rapids came up with an interesting question. This really isn't about the Supreme Court, but this is an opportunity to find out more perhaps about both of our candidates. Here's what he had to say.
Trump's nomination of Amy Coney Barrett has raised questions about her Catholic faith as it relates to potential service on the Supreme Court. Could you each talk about your particular faith perspectives, how such perspectives have shaped you and readied you for service in Congress?
Mr. Meijer, I believe the question goes first to you. This is one of those opportunities that we have to find out a little bit more about both of you outside of what you would do politically.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve, for that question. My opponent has been very clear about her upbringing, and I haven't shared too much of mine because I wasn't born in the church. I sought it out when I was a teenager. I sought out and became baptized. And I'll be very honest, you know, I'm a firm believer in living through my acts, through service, through helping others, that which I believe, and showing that fruit of the Spirit. So I apologize, I'm not the most comfortable in talking about issues that are deep and personal and that reside within. But on the issue of Amy Coney Barrett, I've been very disappointed by a lot of the attacks that have been centered on her faith. You know, I think faith is something that is critical to all of us. It lives within. And it shouldn't be an issue that's up for debate. It shouldn't be something that activists on the left attack and cause fear-mongering over. It should be something that we respect and that we show through our acts how we live and how we engage with the world.
Ms. Scholten.
This is an area of agreement for Mr. Meijer and myself. I absolutely, I disavow the attacks on Amy Coney Barrett. She is a woman who, lives her faith out as she sees fit. I am a Christian. I live out my faith through acts of service as well. It's what called me to a life of public service, serving women and children at Mel Trotter Ministries, becoming a public interest lawyer, and now wanting to serve as a representative for Michigan's 3rd Congressional District to put the needs of the poor, the marginalized, people who have been left out of the system front and center. I think that we as Christians know that our faith doesn't have a political party. Discerning people of faith, of all faiths, can decide for themselves where their political affiliations lie. But I'm happy to talk about my faith and how it inspires me so that people can get to know more about me and why I'm running.
One of our viewers in Ionia County wants to know this. Scott Hune from Muir says, are either of you willing to work across party lines? I think most people are sick of this petty back and forth, he says, that if it's a Republican thought, the Democrats hate it and vice versa. I don't even think that the parties take time to consider what the other party is talking about. Ms. Scholten?
I could not agree more. This is something that I have done my entire life. As I mentioned earlier, during my time at the Justice Department, I wasn't a political appointee. I worked with Republicans and Democrats alike to get things done. We see a good idea and it's worth acting on. I was not raised a Democrat. I actually didn't know a Democrat until I was a senior in high school. So to me, an idea is just a good idea, and we'll act on it for the good of West Michigan.
Mr. Meijer?
Well, this is an area where my opponent and I are in sharp agreement. Again, I have spent time advocating, working across the aisle to find common sense solutions. I've already committed to, if elected and earning the vote of the people of West Michigan, to join the Problem Solvers Caucus so that we can be part of that initiative to find all of the key areas of agreement, because we're never going to agree on everything. I'm under no illusion that politics is ever going to be simple. But let's disagree on let's find those areas where we need to make bipartisan solutions, whether it's preserving Social Security so that the promises made to those who are at or near retirement are kept, whether it is finding a workable healthcare system that doesn't bankrupt our families while protecting pre-existing conditions, while working to fix our broken immigration system so that we are both ensuring there is a strong and workable legal pathway while at the same time securing our borders. We can find these solutions, but the only way we're going to be able to really make a difference is if they are working across the aisle to achieve them.
Kind of staying on the same theme, we have another viewer who has recorded his question. This is Chris Rossmarin in Grand Rapids. He has this for you.
Can you name at least a couple issues where your personal views differ from that of your party? And would you be willing to vote for legislation on those issues if they differed from those of your party?
This question is really part of a central theme. I can't tell you how many questions we dealt with from viewers that we're talking. We had some earlier about cooperation, getting along, doing things. And I thought that was stated pretty well. It goes to you first, Mr. Meijer.
Well, thank you, Chris, for that. And again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I am very willing to make sure that the interests of the people of West Michigan are put first. Right? I said at the beginning of this debate, and I've said it time and again, that I am willing to make sure that our party, my party, that the country is moving in the right direction, regardless of who proposes a solution. So when it comes to the climate crisis, when it comes to environmental protection, when it comes to addressing PFAS and PFOA contamination that has poisoned the wells of some of our neighbors here in West Michigan, when it comes to clean air, when it comes to finding these solutions, I'm concerned with outcomes. I'm not concerned with inputs. I don't care whose idea it was. I don't care who gets the credit for it. I don't need to be up on the dais when the photo op happens. I want to make sure that we are having lasting solutions, regardless of where that idea may come from, because that is going to be the most important thing at the end of the day for the people of West Michigan.
Ms. Scholten, same question.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, throughout the debate tonight, I've been doing this my whole life. I have the experience of actually, working across the aisle and getting legislation in the books that works for people on some of the thorniest issues. Immigration. When I was an attorney advisor at the Department of Justice, we worked to improve on our federal regulations to keep America safer, to make our immigration system more just, more humane, to work better for the American people. Those are exactly some of the things that I will bring to Congress. When it comes to disagreeing with my party, I think that sometimes the Democrats can get a little too out of control with the spending. And we certainly need to prioritize not giving handouts to millionaires and billionaires and corporations, but prioritizing the needs of hard-working families, creating middle-class tax cuts, making sure that we're not running up that deficit. So I'd push back on major spending programs like Medicare for All or the Green New Deal, and those are some of the areas that I would differ.
All right, so we're going to change things up a little bit, so follow along with me here if you will. I'm going to play you a voice again. We've been hearing from our viewers, but these voices are voices you should know well. I'm going to play you a portion of one of your recent commercials. And then I'm going to give you 60 seconds to tell me and the audience why you chose that position in your commercial. Then I'm not going to have your opponent speak to that. I'm going to play a clip of your commercial and let you answer that. And then I will come back to you and you will get a 30-second rebuttal, as will you. They do not count against the 3 we gave you in the first place. This is a bonus. So I want to start with you, Ms. Scholten, and this is what one of your recent commercials had to say.
There's no good time to lose your health insurance. This year has got to be one of the worst. Peter Meijer, with a $50 million trust fund, will never understand that. Meijer promised he'll repeal the law that protects people with pre-existing conditions. Millions would lose health coverage and older folks would get charged more.
Now, I had no way of knowing we would have already been engaged in this conversation by the time we got there, but we are, so please, 60 seconds supporting that commercial.
We're in the middle of a global health pandemic. 5.4 million Americans are without health insurance because of our economic recession due to job loss. Mr. Meijer and his party are fighting with everything they have to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It is the only law that stands between so many vulnerable individuals and having access to affordable care. I can't go to the grocery store without someone grabbing my arm and telling me with tears in their eyes about how they can't afford to put food on their table because of the high cost of prescription drugs. We need to elect leaders who not only have the experience, but the empathy to lead. When it's time to make those crucial decisions for the people of West Michigan, who are we going to put first? The people in our own neighborhood or our own pocketbooks? And those are important questions that we need to be asking of our elected officials. Mr. Meijer made clear that he would repeal this law.
Mr. Meijer, here is a clip from one of your recent commercials. I want you to take your 60 seconds and talk about supporting that. Then I'm going to come back and do a rebuttal with Ms. Scholten and then with you. So here's that commercial.
Democrat Hillary Scholten. What's behind the curtain? Scholten wants Elizabeth Warren-style health care that could separate you from your doctor and close 44 Michigan hospitals. With Hillary Scholten, health care as you know it will be...
Cut! Meijer?
Well, I'm glad my opponent earlier denounced Medicare for All, because she is strongly supportive of a public option, which is the first step towards a more socialized healthcare system. Now, I've been frankly worried by some of those supporters that my opponent has. You know, I had a competitive primary, so every stance that I have was out in the open, and it's there for the public to see and judge. My opponent, the Democratic Party, was able to keep control, make sure that there was no one there to challenge her. So she was never asked those tough questions early on. Didn't have to prove herself to her party, but instead was handed the way. Now, I want to make sure that healthcare is affordable, but doubling down on the same governmental regulations, the same governmental control, and trying to fundamentally upend our system is where we've already seen an explosion in the premiums under the Affordable Care Act. It's what is already bankrupting people today. And doubling and tripling down on those type of policies is only going to get affordable health care further from reach and ensure that everyone's taxes go up increasingly.
All right. Again, these do not count against your rebuttals. Ms. Scholten first.
First, Mr. Meijer, let's be clear. No one gave me a handout. I worked my way here, and I am so proud of the grassroots campaign that we have built and where we stand right now. Mr. Meijer's ads have not passed even a basic fact check. In fact, they have been stated that they were intentionally derived to deceive the public. He accuses me of supporting healthcare plans that I have never agreed to. I've made very clear that I don't support Medicare for all. The studies that Mr. Meijer cites to are funded by big pharma who have an interest in their own pocketbooks as opposed to the health of the American people.
Mr. Meijer, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I hope the fact checkers actually take the time to look at my opponent's negative ads. Right out the gate, 2 days after I won our primary, she called me a far-right extremist. Now, that was only in a fundraising letter, so maybe she takes a different tone when trying to raise money. But I've also been very concerned at how she has the backing and $500,000 by abortion advocates like Emily's List running negative ads against me as well. This is disappointing, and I hope we can clarify.
All right, thank you very much for allowing me to take that departure. We are going to go to another recorded question, and this one is from Eric Austin. And he sent us this question. I think this gives you another chance to talk about your education, your background, where you've been, what you've done, because as we get closer and closer, I mean, people are already voting, and we know that in an election cycle like this, with two fresh faces in the race, there are still people out there that are trying to figure out who you are. So here's the question.
I'm skeptical now because I've heard a lot of politicians make promises that sounded great, but 2 years later, you check their progress and nothing gets done. What is your capability in the bureaucracy that will enable you to get it done when you promise it now?
Mr. Meijer, I believe the first response is yours.
That is an incredibly common frustration, and it's one that we've seen Justin Amash speak to time and time again. The fact that good intentions and good people come out one end, and in gridlock, partisanship, and just the maintenance of an unsustainable status quo comes out the other. Now, I am excited at the opportunities to modernize and to reform some of the ways that Congress operates, so it's not just two folks making decisions. It's not the House minority leader and the majority leader getting together and deciding on behalf of all 435 members of Congress what's to be done. Now, when it comes to being able to get things done, the military is a tremendous bureaucracy. And the places where I've cut my teeth, where I've spent most of my 20s, Afghanistan, Iraq, disaster zones, I'm probably one of the few people who will find a more organized system in Washington, D.C. But who do you send to bring order out of chaos? Who do you send to get things done? It's the veterans who've been in situations like that, who know what it takes to bring things back to the way they should operate for the country.
Ms. Scholten.
Thank you so much for that question. Trust in government is at an all-time low, and that is why it's so important that we look at, not only what some people say on a debate stage, but the pledges and the promises that they make when they think that the cameras aren't rolling. I've worked my entire life to get things done across the aisle. When I was an attorney at the Department of Justice, I worked with Republicans and Democrats alike to pass important regulations regarding immigration. We worked on issues of civil detention, looking at how and when individuals should be released, making sure that we put the safety of the American people first, but also kept individuals healthy when they were in the detention of our government. I've also proudly worked alongside community members and local law enforcement here to pass new policies about how we can keep our communities safe and enhance trust in local police and our communities.
Mr. Meijer would like 30 seconds to have a rebuttal. This is your last one, sir.
My opponent mentioned keeping consistent with what we say on the debate stage, with what we've said behind closed doors, with what we said to groups that are supporting us. So I'm very curious, and I would love to hear her thoughts on where she stands on the issue of abortion, because all of the top pro-life organizations in the country are supporting my campaign because I'm proudly pro-life. And she has over $500,000 from a group whose sole purpose is to elect pro-choice Democrats to office supporting her campaign. I think this is a critical issue that should be addressed for the people of West Michigan.
We'll move on to the next question. Doug Sisler is from the Lake Odessa area, and he wants to know this.
How do you feel about term limits of 2 terms, possibly 3, but no more, for members of the U.S. House of Representatives and members of the U.S. Senate? And also, how do you feel about an age limit for members of the Supreme Court, somewhere from 68 to 72 years?
I believe we are ready for you, Ms. Scholten, to take that question first, if you want to try to unpack both of those, term limits and age limits.
Happy to. I think that when we look at the trust in government issue, so often it is because people have become complacent in their jobs, and we need a robust electoral process to hold our elected officials accountable. I think that term limits can sometimes serve a disservice. It can take a while to get up to speed and know your job and begin to serve the best interest of your constituents. So I don't think that it is the only cut and dried way to hold our elected officials accountable. We need to make sure that we can, get special interest money out of politics so that we are beholden only to the needs and interests of our constituents. I'm so proud to be endorsed by End Citizens United, who is looking to end special interest in Washington, special interest money in our elections. And I think that this is a crucial way to enhance the robustness of our electoral process.
Mr. Meijer, and we do need to keep our times close. We're getting near the end of the program.
Okay. Well, first off, let me say I completely agree that with my opponent that term limits, in my words, they are tackling the right issue, but with the wrong problem. We've seen in Lansing the dysfunction that occurs when you take away the ability of the folks who are learning the system, with the democratically elected leaders we send there, and empower the bureaucracy, empower the folks who have no term limits. But I'm also glad that my opponent brought up the End Citizens United. There's over $1.2 million in liberal dark money from super PACs on the coast that's already been committed to support and promote my opponent. Now, I hope that she will recognize the inherent hypocrisy between being endorsed by a group called End Citizens United while at the same time getting elected by the very same liberal dark money, by the same super PACs and PACs and outside interests that are trying to send her to Washington today.
Candidates, this is the last question. We're going to have to cut it down to 30 seconds so we can get to the closings. Mr. Meijer, it'll go first to you. Moving to the environment and climate change, Linda Trout wants to know, quote, what would you do to encourage the health of the Great Lakes? I'll expand that to drinking water and fighting PFAS. 30 seconds, keep it tight.
With 30 seconds, I would strongly support continuing investment in the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I would support passage of the PFAS Cleanup Act, the Watershed Health and Wellness Act, so that all of our neighbors know that when they turn on their faucet, clean water is coming out. In addition, continuing to commit federal funds to rehabilitating our ecosystem and making sure we're making a shift to renewable energy so we decrease our carbon output and other greenhouse gases that are leading to the climate crisis we're in today.
Nothing like trying to tackle a topic like this in 30 seconds. I appreciate your understanding, Ms. Scholten.
Absolutely. As a mother of 2 boys, I care deeply about the water that I put in their bodies every single day. This is a personal issue. As I mentioned, I'm so proud to be endorsed by the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters, who recognize that my record, which you can find out more on the website, is the record for environmental justice. Absolutely support the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and the PFAS Action Plan. We've got to empower the EPA to hold corporate polluters accountable so they clean up their messes, not taxpayers.
Candidates, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to say to 60 seconds. We're getting really close. Closing statement starting with you, Mr. Meijer.
Well, thank you all for joining us here tonight. I think it's critical that the people of West Michigan go into our next elections informed, not seeing who can spend however many millions of dollars calling out baseless lies. Now, I refuse to support any repeal of the Affordable Care Act that does not cover pre-existing conditions and ensure expanded access. I know this is my last opportunity to address, and my opponent has been spreading falsehoods, so let me be crystal clear on that front. But let me also be clear that if elected, if I earn the trust of the people of West Michigan to return strong, stable, and effective representation of this district, if the people of West Michigan allow me to continue to serve, as I've served my country in Iraq, as I've served my fellow man in humanitarian aid and disaster response, that I will work for everyone in West Michigan, not just those who sent me there. And I will work with anybody in order to make sure that the policies that the people of West Michigan need to keep them safe, to keep them healthy, and to promote economic and educational opportunities, to promote prosperity and growth, that those are achieved for the good of not only our folks today, but also future generations.
Ms. Scholten, 60 seconds.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much to the viewers at home for tuning in. This is such a crucial election. We're at a crossroads here in West Michigan with this election, and we're deciding who we are and what we stand for. I believe that the contrasts here could not be clearer. I'm a practical, problem-solving, solution-oriented, middle-class mom. I've got the experience and the empathy to lead West Michigan forward into a better and brighter future for all, not just for some, not just for the wealthy and well-connected. We're building something new here in West Michigan, a new political home for people who feel abandoned by their party. We're bringing together people on the right and the left who just want to put their differences aside and get things done. It would be the honor of my lifetime to serve as your first Congresswoman. We hope you'll join me. You can learn more and get involved at HillaryScholten.com.
Candidates, that brings this debate to an end, with both of you proving that you can disagree on issues without being disagreeable. I appreciate you showing people what a good conversation should look like. I want to thank the viewers. I particularly want to thank the production department, the folks here at WOOD TV, who always make these things work so well. Remember, we have no interest in who you vote for, but we do have an interest that you vote. And voting starts right now. Thank you for watching. Again, candidates, thank you. Have a good night.